All right, to learn anything about sewing, you have to understand fabrics, obviously. So in quilting, just stick with quilting cotton. There are all sorts of different fabrics at the fabric store. Um, Quilting cotton is going to be the easiest to work with. It's the most stable. I wouldn't even I wouldn't even look at anything else, especially right now. And typically people don't quilt with anything but cotton. So if you go to a quilting store, it's all gonna be cotton. Um, I would say right now just stick with Joann's. Get like the $3.99 a yard while you're learning before you venture off into some of the nicer cottons. Where it's 12, 15, $20 a yard. So uh, to understand fabrics, you have to understand grain. Um, this is a really good example. Um, so, grain. So this is cotton is woven, um, and so what that means is that like you have grain lines. You got threads going this way, and you have threads going this way. So it's woven. It's a woven fabric. This is a very loose weave, so it's very unstable. Making that blanket was very difficult because it just moves around on you. But this is just like a standard quilting cotton. You can see like how much more stable this is. So in this fabric, you can't really see the lines as much as you can like on this. But there is a weave to it. So on grain, that's what it's called. This is your selvage edge, and this is the part of the fabric that was finished by machine at the factory. And all the other threads that are used to make up the fabric are parallel or perpendicular to your selvage edge. So you'll have one on each side. So you'll have a selvage here and you'll have a selvage on the other edge. The top and the bottom is where the store cuts or where the machine cuts. So to have something on grain, and that means that whatever your pattern piece or whatnot is lined up parallel to the selvage. This matters a heck of a lot more in sewing garments and things, because as you'll learn in a few minutes, there's a way that you can make fabrics be stretchy. And so anyway, lining something up parallel to the selvage is going to be on grain. Cross grain is where you take your pattern piece. So cross grain is going to be on the cross. So you'll line it up. You'll line up your pattern piece perpendicular to the selvage. So on grain is where it's lined up with the selvage. I would imagine with your mat and rotary cutter, you're going to be using your selvage edge as your straight edge. So you really shouldn't have an issue with like whether it's on grain or cross grain, blah 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 blah, because you're probably going to cut everything like this, I would imagine. But there is something you have to be aware of, and it's called bias, and it does make your fabric stretchy. So on grain, very stable. Cross grain, you got a little bit of give there, right? That's kind of why you want to put everything on grain. Got a little bit of give. Your bias is 45 degrees from your selvage, thereabouts. Okay, so if you cut something diagonal, basically, from your selvage, you can have problems. So this is why, okay? This is your bias edge. You see how much that stretches? That's a lot. And where that comes into play for you, and that what's going to be important, is when you cut triangles. So every triangle, you're going to have an edge that's on the bias. So that's my bias edge on this piece. So that's my on grain, probably cross grain and bias. So when you are using triangles, you have to be really careful. So just in sewing, so you're not stretching it out. So this is a piece, this is called a block. So so this is like the actual, like, I'm going to put a bunch of these together to make a quilt. So so this has a ton of bias in it. So this is going to be a very stretchy, very movable quilt top. And you just have to be aware that that's going to happen. So that just, all it really means for you is that when you're sewing, don't stretch your triangles. You got to just, like, try not to do much more than just, like, barely sew it, handle it. So, like, this is the quilt top that I have so far. This is supposed to be G's quilt. We're definitely coming back to this when we talk about design. And so you can tell, like, it has so much bias in it. And so all that really means for me is that the last thing I want to do is stretch this in any way. And also, like, when I quilt it, I'm going to have to, like, really quilt it heavily so it's not just, like, moving around. Because the one thing that bias does do, especially in garment making, it can stretch out. It can cause, like if you're making a skirt and it's got, like, a bias seam on it, it can cause, like, your hem to be, like, uneven. So it's just something to be aware of. Unless you're cutting triangles, you shouldn't be cutting anything on the bias. So yeah, so just don't stretch it and you'll be fine. You just have to be a little more careful. Now, let's talk about fabric choices. So, anything works. Anything works is fine, as long as it's quilting cotton. You can pick anything you want. And it also depends on how big your pieces are going to be. So since I usually work small pieces, I don't want anything, like, too crazy big, because then, like, it'll just kind of look like a solid color. So I usually work with, like, things that have a little smaller prints. Like, this is actually, so this is called a feed sack print. It's, so the feed sack quilts of the 1930s and 40s are highly collectible. And so they make the prints still. It's like a style of print. And these are always, like, super, super cute. And I love them. But yeah, so it's pretty much anything goes. You can pick prints for a certain reason. So, like, I'll show you. So in this box, so that little quilt that has, like, the tiny postage stamp quilts, like, this is my little box that I cut out all the little pieces. This is my little template. But let's say you wanted to do a Santa Claus quilt or something like that, and you wanted to have a lot of Santa Claus faces on it for whatever reason. You could buy a print that specifically fits in this. So it has a name. It's called Fussy Cutting, Fussy, because it's very wasteful of fabric. Because like you would take your little template and you would cut around each thing that you wanted to cut. So I'll show you an example. So like these fabrics that I have, I used my little template to cut out the animals, right? And so like I specifically cut that way. Most of the stuff in this box is fussy cutted. Like I cut out just little poinsettias, you know, little shapes and stuff. So that is also an option. I'm not sure how much of the rotary you could use for fussy cutting. You probably have to cut each piece individually, just because of like the nature of like picking and choosing on the fabric where you want to cut. But also, so don't walk by large prints. So like this is, I'll explain this quilt. So this is actually a traditional quilt block. It's called Broken Dishes, and I thought that was I thought the name was like really it sounded like Jeep. So I wanted to find something because his favorite color is red, and he's wild and crazy, and like it kind of looks like flames, right? It has like a really nice like texture and like movement within the fabric, but the fabric itself, they're huge flowers. Right? And sometimes you have to think, okay, what is this gonna actually look like when it's cut down? So like, yeah, you see flowers here, but like I just really liked all this movement, right? It kind of looked like flames. So like that's why I chose the fabric. And also it had like all this color variation, which I thought would be really interesting to look at. So like on the quilt top, it has this like really cool like variation. Now I was trying, when I was putting this together, I was like, okay, do I need to have like all of these like blue blocks or red ones or pink ones, like, and maybe more organized? And I really liked, I decided that I really liked it being kind of all mixed up. I thought it gives a really, really interesting, a more interesting quilt top because it's a little bit more chaotic, which is kind of like Jeep. And so don't look past like really big prints like this that you can cut down and make, and it'll make something different. Yeah, so when you go to the store, I'm not sure how much fabric you want to get. I wouldn't get anything more than like half a yard, like right now, especially when you're maybe just practicing, just getting a feel for it. So get a half yard, get 2 colors. You can do white plus a print or a color. You can do 2 prints that look good together. I would also stay away from anything that has directionality. So anything that has stripes, diagonals, plaids, anything that could, because like if you cut a bunch of like triangles out of stripes, you gotta line the stripes up, and it becomes a little bit more complicated. So just stick with something. Get something like this that has like, it's a pretty dense pattern. It's all over. Has no direction. Like, is that the right direction? Is this the right direction? It has no direction. So just something that you can practice with, that's easier to work with than something that has a lot of stuff going on. So I would stick with something like this, and then I would get a plaid. You can get, I think this is just like white cotton. You can get muslin, white muslin, just like whatever you think would be best. And that is all of your fabric basics.